Chapter 23 of 17. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jonathan Burchard, August 2009. 17 by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 23. Fathers Forget. To the competent 20s, hundreds of miles suggesting no impossibility, such departures may be rending, but not tragic. Implacable the difference to 17. Miss Pratt was going home, and 17 could not follow. It could only mourn upon the lonely shore, tracing little angelic footprints left in the sand. To 17, such a departure is final. It is a vanishing. And now it seemed possible that William might be deprived even of the last romantic consolations, of the last waltz together, of the last listening to music in the moonlight together, of all those sacred lasts of the last evening together. He had pleaded strongly for a dress suit as a fitting recognition of his 17th birthday anniversary, but he had been denied by his father with a jocularity more crushing than rigor. Since then, in particular since the arrival of Miss Pratt, Mr. Baxter's temper had been growing steadily more and more even. That is, as affected by William's social activities, it was uniformly bad. Nevertheless, after heavy brooding, William decided to make one final appeal before he resorted to measures which the necessities of despair had caused him to contemplate. He wished to give himself every chance for a good effect; therefore he did not act hastily, but went over what he intended to say, rehearsing it with a few appropriate gestures, and even taking some pleasure in the pathetic dignity of this performance, as revealed by occasional glances at the mirror of his dressing-table. In spite of these little alleviations, his trouble was great and all too real, for unhappily the previous rehearsal of an emotional scene does not prove the emotion insincere. Descending, he found his father and mother still sitting upon the front porch. Then, standing before them, solemn-eyed, he uttered a preluding cough and began. "Father," he said in a loud voice, "I have come to—" "Dear me!" Mrs. Baxter exclaimed, not perceiving that she was interrupting an intended oration. "Willie, you do look pale. Sit down, poor child. You oughtn't to walk so much in this heat." "Father," William repeated, "I s'pose you got her safely home from church," Mr. Baxter said. "She might have been carried off by footpads if you three boys hadn't been along to take care of her." But William persisted heroically. "Father," he said, "Father, I have come to—" "What on earth's the matter with you?" Mr. Baxter ceased to fan himself. Mrs. Baxter stopped rocking, and both stared, for it had dawned upon them that something unusual was beginning to take place. William backed to the start and tried it again. "Father, I have come to—" He paused and gulped, evidently expecting to be interrupted, but both of his parents remained silent, regarding him with puzzled surprise. "Father," he began once more, I have come to place before you something I think it's your duty as my father to undertake, and I have thought over this step before laying it before you." "My soul," said Mr. Baxter under his breath. "My soul." "At my age," William continued, swallowing, and fixing his earnest eyes upon the roof of the porch, to avoid the disconcerting stare of his father, "at my age, there's some things that ought to be done and some things that ought not to be done. If you ask me what I thought ought to be done, there is only one answer. When anybody as old as I am has to go out among other young men his own age that already got one, like anyway half of them have, who I go with, and their fathers have already taken such a step, because they felt it was the only right thing to do, because at my age, and the young men I go with's age, it is the only right thing to do, because that is something nobody could deny, at my age." Here William drew a long breath, and, deciding to abandon that sentence as irrevocably tangled, began another. "I have thought over this step, because there comes a time to every young man when they must lay a step before their father before something happens that they would be sorry for. I have thought this undertaking over, and I am certain it would be your honest duty—" "My soul!" gasped Mr. Baxter. "I thought I knew you pretty well, but you talk like a stranger to me. What is all this? What you want?" "A dress suit," said William. He had intended to say a great deal more before coming to the point, but although through nervousness he had lost some threads of his rehearsed plea, It seemed to him that he was getting along well and putting his case with some distinction and power. He was surprised and hurt, therefore, to hear his father utter a wordless shout in a tone of wondering derision. "I have more to say," William began, but Mr. Baxter cut him off. "A dress suit!" he cried. "Well, I'm glad you were talking about something, because I honestly thought it must be too much sun." At this, the troubled William brought his eyes down from the porch roof and forgot his rehearsal. He lifted his hand appealingly. "Father," he said, "I got to have one." "Got to?" Mr. Baxter laughed a laugh that chilled the supplicant through and through. "At your age, I thought I was lucky if I had any suit that was fit to be seen in. You're too young, Willie. I don't want you to get your mind on such stuff, and if I have my way, you won't have a dress suit for 4 years more, anyhow." "Father, I got to have one. I got to have one right away." The urgency in William's voice was almost tearful. "I don't ask you to have it made, or to go to expensive tailors, but there's plenty of good ready-made ones that only cost about $40. They're advertised in the paper. Father, wouldn't you spend just $40? I'll pay it back when I'm in business. I'll work." Mr. Baxter waved all this aside. "It's not the money. It's the principle that I'm standing for, and I don't intend—" "Father, won't you do it?" "No, I will not." William saw that sentence had been passed, and all appeals for a new trial denied. He choked, and rushed into the house without more ado. "Poor boy," his mother said. "Poor boy, nothing!" fumed Mr. Baxter. "He's about lost his mind over that Miss Pratt. Think of his coming out here and starting a regular debating society declamation before his mother and father! Why, I never heard anything like it in my life. I don't like to hurt his feelings, and I'd give him anything I could afford that would do him any good, but all he wants it for now is to splurge around in at this party before that little yellow-haired girl. I guess he can wear the kind of clothes most of the other boys wear, the kind I wore at parties, and never thought about wearing anything else. What's the world getting to be like? 17 years old and throws a fit because he can't have a dress suit." Mrs. Baxter looked thoughtful. But suppose he felt he couldn't go to the dance unless he wore one, poor boy." "All the better," said Mr. Baxter firmly. "Do him good to keep away and get his mind on something else." "Of course," she suggested with some timidity, $40 isn't a great deal of money. And a ready-made suit, just to begin with—" Naturally, Mr. Baxter perceived whither she was drifting. "$40 isn't 1,000," he interrupted. "But what you want to throw it away for? One reason a boy of 17 oughtn't to have evening clothes is the way he behaves with any clothes. $40! Why, only this summer he sat down on Jane's open paint box twice in 1 week." "Well, Miss Pratt is going away, and the dance will be her last night. I'm afraid it would really hurt him to miss it. I remember once, before we were engaged, that evening before Papa took me abroad, and you—" "It's no use, Mamma," he said. "We were both in the 20s. Why, I was 6 years older than Willie even then. There's no comparison at all. I'll let him order a dress suit on his 21st birthday and not a minute before. I don't believe in it, and I intend to see that he gets all this stuff out of his system. He's got to learn some hard sense." Mrs. Baxter shook her head doubtfully, but she said no more. Perhaps she regretted a little that she had caused Mr. Baxter's evening clothes to be so expansively enlarged, for she looked rather regretful. She also looked rather incomprehensible, not to say cryptic, during the long silence which followed, and Mr. Baxter resumed his rocking, unaware of the fixity of gaze which his wife maintained upon him, a thing the most loyal will do sometimes. The incomprehensible look disappeared before long, but the regretful one was renewed in the mother's eyes whenever she caught glimpses of her son that day, and at the table, where William's manner was gentle, even toward his heartless father. Underneath that gentleness, the harried self of William was no longer debating a desperate resolve, but had fixed upon it, and on the following afternoon Jane chanced to be a witness of some resultant actions. She came to her mother with an account of them. "Mamma, what you s'pose Willie wants of those 2 old market baskets that were down cellar?" "Why, Jane?" "Well, he carried 'em in his room, and then he saw me lookin', and he said, 'G'way from here!' and shut the door. He looked so funny. What's he want of those old baskets, Mamma?" "I don't know. Perhaps he doesn't even know himself, Jane." But William did know, definitely. He had set the baskets upon chairs, and now, with pale determination, he was proceeding to fill them. When his task was completed, the two baskets contained: 1. Heavy-weight winter suit of clothes. 1. Light-weight summer suit of clothes. 1 cap. 1 straw hat. 2 pairs of white flannel trousers. 2 madras shirts. 2 flannel shirts. 2 silk shirts. 7 soft collars. 3 silk neckties. 1 crocheted tie. 8 pairs of socks. 1 pair of patent leather shoes. 1 pair of tennis shoes. 1 overcoat. Some underwear. 1 2-foot shelf of books consisting of several sterling works upon mathematics in a damaged condition, 5 of Shakespeare's plays, expurgated for schools and colleges, and also damaged, a work upon political economy, and another upon the science of physics, Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, How to Enter a Drawing Room, and 500 other hints, with witty sayings from here and there, Lorna Doone, Quentin Durward, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, a very old copy of Moths, and a small Bible. William spread handkerchiefs upon the 2 over-bulging cargoes, that their nature might not be disclosed to the curious, and after listening a moment at his door, took the baskets, 1 upon each arm, then went quickly down the stairs and out of the house, out of the yard and into the alley, by which route he had modestly chosen to travel. After an absence of about 2 hours, he returned empty-handed and anxious. "Mother, I want to speak to you," he said, addressing Mrs. Baxter in a voice which clearly proved the strain of these racking days. "I want to speak to you about something important." "Yes, Willie?" "Please send Jane away. I can't talk about important things with a child in the room." Jane, naturally, wished to stay, since he was going to say something important. "Mamma, do I have to go?" "Just a few minutes, dear." Jane walked submissively out of the door, leaving it open behind her. Then, having gone about 6 feet farther, she halted, and, preserving a breathless silence, consoled herself for her banishments by listening to what was said, hearing it all as satisfactorily as she had remained in the room. Quiet, thoughtful children like Jane avail themselves of these little pleasures oftener than is suspected. "Mother," said William with great intensity, "I want to ask you please to lend me $3.60. "What for, Willie?" "Mother, I just ask you to lend me $3.60. "But what for?" "Mother, I don't feel I can discuss it any. I simply ask you, will you lend me $3.60? Mrs. Baxter laughed gently. "I don't think I could, Willie, but certainly I should want to know what for. Mother, I am going on 18 years of age, and when I ask for a small sum of money like $3.60, I think I might be trusted to know how to use it for my own good without having to answer questions like a "Why, Willie!" she exclaimed. "You ought to have plenty of money of your own." "Of course I ought," he agreed warmly, "if you'd ask father to give me a regular No, I mean you ought to have plenty left out of that old junk and furniture I let you sell last month. You had over $9. "That was 5 weeks ago," William explained wearily. "But you certainly must have some of it left. Why, it was more than $9, I believe. I think it was nearer 10. Surely you haven't—" "Ye gods!" cried the goaded William. "A person going on 18 years old ought to be able to spend $9 in 5 weeks without everybody's acting like it was a crime. Mother, I ask you the simple question, will you please lend me $3.60? "I don't think I ought to, dear. I'm sure your father wouldn't wish me to, unless you'll tell me what you want it for. In fact, I won't consider it at all unless you do tell me." "You won't do it?" he quavered. She shook her head gently. "You see, dear, I'm afraid the reason you don't tell me is because you know that I wouldn't give it to you if I knew what you wanted it for." This perfect diagnosis of the case so disheartened him that after a few monosyllabic efforts to continue the conversation with dignity he gave it up, and left in such a preoccupation with despondency that he passed the surprised Jane in the hall without suspecting what she had been doing. That evening, after dinner, he addressed to his father an impassioned appeal for $3.60, laying such stress of pathos on this principal argument that if he couldn't have a dress suit at least he ought to be given $3.60, the emphasis is William's, that Mr. Baxter was moved in the direction of consent. But not far enough. "I'd like to let you have it, Willie," he said, excusing himself for refusal, "but your mother felt she oughtn't to do it unless you'd say what you wanted it for, and I'm sure she wouldn't like me to do it. I can't let you have it unless you get her to say she wants me to." Thus advised, the unfortunate made another appeal to his mother the next day, and having brought about no relaxation of the situation, again petitioned his father on the following evening. So it went, the torn and driven William turning from parent to parent, and surely, since the world began, the special sum of $3.60 has never been so often mentioned in any one house and in the same space of time as it was in the house of the Baxters during Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of that oppressive week. But on Friday, William disappeared after breakfast and did not return to lunch. End of chapter 23.